Yeah, the concept of indigenous peoples, self-autonomy, is very complex, but it is there. It's only that it's being suppressed by the nation states. The situation of the Maasai is one of an old community that has been really fighting for its self-autonomy for many, many years. And you cannot talk about self-autonomy without really talking about colonization, because that's first one. Before colonization, a community like the Maasai was self-organized, it's territorial. There are still different Maasai territorial sections spread, and they know where this is our land. They have their own governance system, institution of governance. They have their own leadership, their own armies, the warriors. So I think from what happened is that when the British came, because Maasai was the most powerful community, well organized, they had to find a way to really disrupt all that so that they can take the land, and that's exactly what happened. They more or less found a way of breaking the leadership. For instance, they took one part of the community to be their allies, and they used that community, the one section of the Maasai against the other section of the Maasai. So that's exactly what happened. They managed to break the Maasai dominance, autonomy and leadership. And that's what also based on the nature of the Maasai, that they move from one area to the other. It became a little bit more difficult for them to self-organize again, because what happened is that they first had to sign an agreement with the Maasai. It's actually not an agreement, a treaty. Because first of all, they signed a treaty in 1904. This treaty created two Maasai reserves, one in northern Kenya, Laikipia, where I come from, and then because many Maasai were there, they created another reserve in southern Maasai, which they called the Ngong Reserve, which is a current Narok and Kajiado bordering Tanzania. So after that, they agreed that the Maasai will be in those two kind of reserves. The rest of the land will go to the hands of the settlers. That was towards to more or less to create room for British soldiers who are coming from the war. That's what happened. And then before then, in 1911, they had another treaty with the Maasai. And what happened in this treaty is that they say the Maasai leaders, spiritual leaders, have agreed that all the Maasai should move to south. And which was, of course, it was a lie. They manipulated the Maasai leadership, because then, of course, these were written treaties. We still have copies of them. But then there were no Maasai who had gone to school, so you wonder how they really had interpreted, or who really interpreted the agreement for them. So it's a manipulation to dominate and to break the self-autonomy of the Maasai. So what happened is that it was in 1911, the northern Maasai reserve, which is Laikipia, was dissolved, and then all the Maasai had to move to south. So that's exactly what happened. After that, they were moved. Some of them refused to move. They were moved forcefully. The Maasai lost a lot of cattle. They lost a lot of lives. There were a number of human rights abuses. And that's then became the trouble for the Maasai up to until today, that the Maasai are struggling to redefine their own original self-autonomy, because it's actually a Maasai nation made of so many sections or territorial groups. There are many spreading all the way from northern Kenya, Samburu, Laikipia, some parts of Nakuru, all the way to Tanzania. All these people are one people. They speak the same language of different dialects. But the leadership structure, if you go to all of them, the leadership structure, organization, ritual ceremonies, they're all the same. So what happened is that that structure was disrupted, and when independence came, the Maasai really tried to get back their land from the colonial settlers. They really struggled. In 1930, in 1912, they went to court in Kenya. Then, of course, it was a British court, the Crown. They call it the Crown. They went to court. They lost. They went to a court of appeal. And then a day before the case was to be settled, the case was moved from Nairobi to Mombasa, which is a distance of about 600 kilometers. And then the only way to get there was a train. So when the Maasai came to Nairobi, they were told the case is actually in Mombasa, which is a coastal town in the coastal line of Indian Ocean. Of course, they could not have gone to attend the case. So the case was determined against them in their own absence. They didn't stop there, and then in 1962, Kenya was the claimer for independence. Was now very rapid in Kenya. There was a lot of groups, trade unions, political parties, African Union, Kenya African Union. There was Maasai Democratic Front. So you see, from the word start, Maasai have been really struggling to get their self-autonomy. It's very difficult. Self-autonomy is actually linked to land. It's not something that can just happen in any space. It's something that is based on land, because social organization, livelihoods. The question of autonomy is actually strongly linked to land. And the moment you lose land, the governance structures that define self-autonomy are weakened and they are disrupted completely. And that's now where the situation the Maasai are. They have lost so much land. Their social organization and the kind of fragmentation of the Maasai into small units where they have lost political power because they are a minority. For instance, us, the Laikipia Maasai, we are only about 40,000, and the total population of Laikipia is almost 400,000. So our voice is totally disrupted. We occupy 10% of that land. Right now, it's very difficult because after independence, the land never to return to the Maasai. The government that came were, of course, the mainstream communities. They tried to fight it in London, do the constitution making that the British should turn up their land up to now. But right now it's impossible, and there's no any other. We still pursue what other avenues for compensation can happen. So redefinition of self-autonomy in the Maasai right now is happening. The government after independence, they really struggled to find out how to handle the Maasai problem. What is really very evident. It was the land was taken. Everybody knows this, but how do we now redefine the Maasai land issue, given that also the other communities also are interested in the same land? See, so what happened? They created what they call Group Ranch Representative Act. A group ranch is like a form of. They wanted to create a law to govern the common or collectively owned land, which of course the other communities had. But the major problem, the major issue was how to really handle the Maasai land question. So they came up with a Group Ranch Act. What this means, a community, for instance, like Kipia Maasai, the way we are organized, we are going into subsections. Each subsection defines its own land boundary, and then from there you register the members of that community, and then you have a register, and then you get a common collective title. That's what a group ranch. In this, it was only the men, head of families, and boys, teenage boys up to age 18. There are also a few instances where, for instance, women, single mothers or somebody who have also got, there was a problem there because women only could access get into the register land rights through their spouses or their sons. So this is what we've had since from in 1968 up to recently, 2016, when really a lot of indigenous peoples have been really moving to try to get real rights. Because for indigenous people, Maasai being one of them, there's a strong link between issues about climate change, land, organization, political power, all these things is linked to land. And because even political boundaries, constituency are defined along boundaries. So if you don't have your land, it means you lose a lot of identity, you get more or less assimilated, and the whole social organization systems, you get disrupted because you now get into the kind of mainstream administrative system. So what happened is we've been pushing for recognition of customary land rights for communities, especially the pastoralists, because in Africa, or the major communities are defining themselves as indigenous are mainly the pastoralists, hunter-gatherers, or agro-pastoralists, and a few fisher-folk communities. But those are kind of frame in which the indigenous peoples. So we collectively came to increase our voice and to push Kenya government. And in 2016, after the new constitution, we got a new constitution 2010 that recognizes, created the National Land Act. That one created the National Land Commission. And right now, under the National Land Commission, there was a Community Land Act, which is more or less what's replacing the Group Ranch Act. In this, it's the same membership, but right now it's broadened. It says communities can now collectively register their land. It includes women, it includes men, and a community is people who are living together, and they can use their own mechanism of electing their own leaders. So it recognizes a bit of a... So in this sense, it also recognizes, the Act also, Community Land Act of 2016, and the Community Land Amendment, National Land Amendment Act of 2018, says that communities have now, they can plan, they can do their natural resource based. So we can, for instance, one of the group branches that we were working, in West where I come from, we are now under that. You have to organize meetings, people come together, they register, all of them, they create a community land assembly. And then from there, they can also do planning, natural resource planning. These are places for grazing. These are places for public school. These are places for ecotourism. These are places. And also, there's a clause that says, that you have to negotiate. If there's an investor, a government cannot just, the national government cannot just say, go take that land. There's a process. A company can get authorization from the government, but you have to go and negotiate. We have to go and negotiate with the people, with the indigenous people. That's now what we are working. It has started. So as we speak, it's a transition from Group Ranch Act to Community Land Act. So we are preparing communities to register, and we are happy that we've received small grants from organizations like UGIA, Namati, and the rest to support this work, because we see this is now, it will strengthen, it will rejuvenate, it will more or less like redefining the original self-autonomy to a kind of a functional self-autonomy within the frame of how things are happening. But also, there's also another form of autonomy that that is still very evident, and we can't. That is more or less like issues like cultural autonomy. The Maasai identity is very strong. It's really strong, and they're still one of the well-known communities in the whole of Africa. And the voice, collectively, we keep this voice that the Maasai are the original kind of owners of the land in East Africa. And we do this by expressing ourselves through stories, through meetings, work conferences. And recently, the UNESCO, UNESCO recognized Maasai culture as a very unique culture, and the rituals that the lineage from this lineage to the other one of the age group. Recently, this year actually, last year, and there will be a big ceremony in May in Kenya when the UNESCO now comes to officially launch that. So I think that issue about cultural autonomy is still, and also the fact that the governments still sometimes they actually do not know how to handle the Maasai issue, because when it comes to culture, the Maasai they are always fronted by the government as the most resilient culture, and they're really proud of it. But when it comes to issue about rights to land, the government goes like silent, and this is the issue. The voice of the Maasai is still there. Of course, it goes all the way. The issue about self-autonomy goes all the way to Tanzania, where there's serious problems about people being... So the threat right now we have, the other threat we have to our function of self-autonomy is conservation, in wildlife conservation, because it's taking more and more land. And of course, the international community sees conservation as one way of addressing issues to be climate change, but it is a threat to livelihoods for the Maasai.